Methodology of Humanities, Module 3, Narration and Representation, Part 7, Narrative Modes of Thinking. The human mind has developed various modes of thinking which can be both logical and imaginative. According to the American cultural psychologist Jerome Bruner, there are two main modes of thinking: the logico-scientific and the narrative mode. Logico-scientific method is a scientific way of analyzing an incident or event. It demands two elements for the completion of meaning. One is the cause and the other is effect. The presence of an action and the reason for the happening of such an action are highly interrelated. If X, then Y. And in the narrative mode, X and then Y. The tortoise won the race because the hare slept out of overconfidence is an example of this. Unlike the logico-scientific mode, in the narrative mode, one action happens and the other follows. There is no X and then Y or X because of Y. It is a sequential description of events. The king died and then the queen died of sorrow. There is a reason in it. But here, the tortoise won the race because the hare slept out of overconfidence. These are all examples of logico-scientific mode. In narrative mode, we have a sequential description of events. One thing happens after another thing. The pattern is framed within a chain of events. It invites the reader to fill in the gaps left by the narrator, inspiring the reader to imagine the rest of the occurrences. The hare slept and the tortoise won the race. Narration is the representation of an event or a series of events. Without an event or an action, there can be description, argument, lyric and other styles of writing. But these are not narratives. My cat's name is Kitty. This simply describes the cat. But my cat was bitten by a snake while it was asleep is a narrative, as it tells an event. The description becomes a narrative with the action of the snake. A narrative always requires a narrator, but mediums like films or plays depend upon acting, cameras, and actors to tell the story. Even silent mediums like paintings can convey events of a narrative. Representation in narration describes two aspects of the construction of a narrative. One, the process used for the presentation of idea, events, actions, characters, etc. Two, the outcome that is created at the end of the narrative process. Representation of signs, symbols, images, idea, thought, imagination, and the like, create an identity when expressed through the medium of narration. It is also influenced by social interaction because social interactions are based on identity. Doctors in a society are represented through the dress code, the mannerism, and dedication towards their vocation, creating a stereotyped identity. Actors get their identity through the character that is being enacted. Similar scales apply to a musician and politician. Thus, identity is created by the representation of a person, character, and idea through the medium of art. Ravi Verma's paintings created models of masculinity and femininity in Malayalam. The Malayali viewing public positioned themselves in accordance with the images created by the art of Ravi Verma. Ravi Verma had assimilated ideas from, of course, European paintings, and it is modern. How should a modern man or woman look like? In the construction of the modern Malayali identity, novels, films, short stories, poems, paintings, music, or mere images, even advertisements, everything contributed much. All these things are different forms of narratives. Characteristics of narratives. 1. Type of artificial construction, not usually present in spontaneous conversation, as in elaborate description of things, prayers, etc. In our everyday life, we never elaborately describe things or objects. When we add multicolor to the basic reality, it becomes an artificial construction. When we go out of our houses for attending a program, we make a kind of ready-made artificial makeup to present ourselves before others. That is a narrative. In prayers, long prayers in churches and temples, we create an artificial kind of a narrative. In the actual world, we never describe things in such a way that the artificiality of it is not projected as such. So there are narratives which are artificial constructions. 2. A degree of prefabrication constructed beforehand that is experienced in narratives and poses a sense of familiarity. This artificiality will not be felt in the second type of narrative where everything would be familiar to us because it is constructed beforehand. We expect that certain things would be like this. Suppose when we attend a wedding party, we know how people would be there, in what type of a dress they would be appearing. So it's familiar to us. 3. Narration has a trajectory, a line of development, a route, a pathway. The movement of the story is always unexpected. A reader supposes them to have beginnings, middles, and ends, as Aristotle stipulated in his Poetics. There should be a beginning, middle, end. There should be unity of time, place, action, etc. But the narration, the beauty of the narration lies in its unexpected contours, turns, twists that is made in the narrative. 5. Narratives are sequences of logically and chronologically related events on one or more individuals transferred into characters in whom readers become interested positively or negatively. Narratives have the capacity to attract us. And when we listen to narratives, of course, there would be some logic. Things would be arranged sequentially. There will be a unity of time. Of course, place and action as well in narratives. And individuals would become characters. The persons we know, actors for example, they would be becoming characters in films. And the readers will be interested in such narratives, irrespective of its positive or negative aspects. 6. The locations, place of action, where events occur are given distinct characteristics and transformed into specific places. A sequential arrangement, unity of time, now unity of place. A local habitation and a place is given to a narrative. It cannot exist in a vacuum. A particular space is given. Location is given. 7. Presence of an omniscient narrator, an all-seeing godlike character or the narrator who is able to see everything, who is able to go everywhere and see what happens. He would be omniscient, present everywhere, and he can tell the story of others. The narrator possesses power and control derived from unlimited knowledge. The narrator knows anything and everything about the characters, the incidents, the events happened and going to happen. He has the controlling power. He can imagine that a character is born or a character is dead, because that kind of a controlling power he has got. So telling a story is not very simple. Constructing a narrative is not an innocent activity. If somebody dies in a narrative, then the narrator or the author is a criminal. He imagines the death of a being. And in that sense, narrator is not free of sins. He is a sinner. A narrator is a sinner. He can create a heaven out of hell or a hell out of heaven. So, mostly our stories end up in the victimization of women. And we can ask storytellers why women are always victimized in stories. Why do they end up their stories in disaster? Why are they not able to overcome issues? Why don't men imagine women having the capacity to withstand such situations and overcome, solve the issue and come out of the situation and never end up as victims? In realist narration, certain novels are there, European novels by Dickens or Eliot or Hardy. These narratives have got certain limitations. They would be just writing down what is happening in the society. In a male-dominated society, women may not be able to overpower men. Unlike in the British or European fiction, we have black American or African American writers like Toni Morrison, for example. They use a different type of narrative. Realist narration can never do justice to the life of women. So they use alternative mechanisms. Magic realism is used, a kind of narrative where women overcome tragedies. They never end up as victims. So, the theoretical attempt to reduce literary narrative to basic principles of narratology presented by E.M. Forster in his Aspect of the Novel, where he distinguishes story and plot, where the king dies and the queen also dies, which is a story, and when it is made into a plot, an addition of explanatory clause such as the king died and then the queen died out of grief is explained. But the question that new theoreticians ask is not that plain. A plot and a story are different. And who tells a story and who devises a plot? His agency, his gender, his power, the godlike omniscient narrator. His position is questioned. The king and the queen are not the only people who are to be narrated in a story. The public, the citizen, the people who were in the margin, their everyday life is to be narrated. And also, why the king dies and the queen dies out of grief? And why not the queen dies and the king dies out of the grief of the death of his queen? That never happened in history or in E.M. Forster's theory. So the subject position that we take changes the narrative mode. Everything would change when we dislocate ourselves from this kind of a fixed advantageous position. The narrator has got a vantage point to see everything. So some people having partial vision will be able to tell another story instead of the majoritarian type of a story that has been told. So for the Aesop fable of hare and the tortoise participating in a race, it is reimagined by so many people because it is an unequal type of a partnership in the race conducted between two different types of living beings. Slow and steady wins the race is the moral of the story of Aesop. But two living beings, one slow, the other fast, and we think that the hare lost the race only because it slept, and tortoise won the race only because of that. This happens in the competition that is there happening in our life, in married life, for example. Men and women, they are unequal partners. So in the competition, who will win the race can never be neutrally analyzed because there is gender power at work. So counter narratives are made from the perspective of lesser beings, minor creatures, and the whole narrative made available in this world in the form of books, written or visual or whatever it is. All these things are to be reanalyzed, rewritten, and we have to analyze the structure of all these established literature canon available to us. For that purpose, narration and representation become two key words and concepts that we have to analyze in detail.